All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the play-in tournament for the Vintage Super League. I'm joined here by Rich Shea. Rich, at least you did some commentary earlier. Got to watch a pretty exciting match.
I did. I can't believe these are all such incredibly good games. We just saw a spectacular match. Um, Dave against Shuhei there, and that was just. I think both players played that incredibly well, and the it just seemed like Dave's cards gave him just the tiny edge that he needed to pull off a really close game.
That game was incredible. I actually left the room for about 30 seconds, and when Shuhei just had two Oath of Druids in his hand, and I thought the game was over. I come back in, and he has a full grip of blue cards, and he's playing a Jace. That was a wild game. Really fun to watch.
It really was. That was a great match. I think both players played it incredibly well. Um,
Hopefully
Brassman
we break
had
that pattern soon, as I have to play Paul in a little bit here. But
there you go. You could break the trend, couldn't you? But that's been the pattern so far.
it has been. And you said we've seen some really fun, exciting games. That's what happens when you don't have workshops running around.
So do you like this metagame better in a Mishra's Free World?
For the moment, I do. I imagine it could become stale. I do think you guys had some good points that the workshop decks provide a good counterbalance to the format. And if we just see 1,000 gush decks, that will also get boring. But I'm at least enjoying. I think in this sort of a tournament, these games certainly have more play to them, and some really fun, exciting games. That's what happens when you don't have workshops running around.
So do you like this metagame better in a Mishra's Free World?
For the moment, I do. I imagine it could become stale. I do think you guys had some good points that the workshop decks provide a good counterbalance to the format. And if we just see 1,000 gush decks, that will also get boring. But I'm at least enjoying. I think in this sort of a tournament, these games certainly have more play to them, and that's fun to watch.
It's good in this tournament. I think it's good in this small tournament. The problem is in the Power 9 Challenge on Saturday, it was just a giant sea of blue decks. I think I played against a dredge deck once, and it was mostly just blue.
Sure. I mean, we'll see if the metagame shakes out or stabilizes. Hopefully it does. If not, certainly will. I'm sure they'll revisit the ban list. You don't want it to be that you have to play all the blue restricted cards. It's important to have other options. Maybe Paul has broken it, and the real path to victory here is with little white creatures.
It may well be that the vintage metagame will just be a metagame full of Thalias and that other 2/2 that steals artifacts.
Yeah, we'll see how this continues and how this shakes out. But so far tonight, it's been really exciting. I think we're about to see now the fourth match of the play-in competitors, the new players to the VSL. I guess this is reigning Vintage World Champion Brian Kelly, who was doing commentary with you earlier, up against Caleb Durward, who's a renowned brewer and deck builder. Any predictions for this match?
I think that Brian Kelly is an extremely good player. I think I have a lot of respect for Caleb too, but I'm gonna think that Kelly's gonna have this. He's the reigning Vintage World Champion. He designed the deck that Shuhei was playing. He also designed the original version of the deck that I won the Vintage Power 9 with. In addition to being a good player, he has just the sort of mind to come up with a brilliant contraption to fight the metagame. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he does and seeing how his deck does.
Yeah, I do think that, for better or worse, with the banning of Lodestone Golem, the restriction of Lodestone Golem, you certainly see, at least in the short term, a contraction of the metagame, which gives people who have that ability to really kind of pick their spots and know the formula well, know the format very well, to they can make a metagame call and come in here with something unexpected and really just crush a tournament. So we'll see if that how that goes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Brian's a good player. He's a good deck builder, but Caleb has also been known to throw some real curveballs. He's famous for his survival of the fittest contraption.
Yep. So he played that in the Legacy GP. He actually got survival banned in Legacy, right? That was his responsibility.
Yes. Yes. So,
Yeah, that deck was fantastic. I fortunately he was on the other side of the bracket for me in that tournament, and I got to dodge him. But that deck was really impressive. And Caleb has been building really innovative decks across all formats for a long time. So definitely could see
yeah,
him coming with something cool here out of left field, and should be exciting.
absolutely. I mean, I've been pretty happy with the deck diversity that we've seen so far in the play-in. We've had actual dragon, oath, white weenie, landstill, Brassion mentor. Yeah, that's been some good diversity. I think we haven't seen any repeated decks, have we?
Not yet, and I think we're seeing a lot of flavors of blue certainly. But you see you can do you can mix it up and come at it from a lot of different angles, even with that shell in place.
I think we've seen as many white decks as we have blue decks, right? Because Paul was on a mono white deck, and Reed Duke was on a deck without white.
Right,
But
and everyone else
blue.
has had. I guess no, sorry. There's also the dragon deck had no white in it as well. So there's
Oh,
two
you're
decks
right.
with,
You're right.
with no white.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
So
yeah.
So white is one short. So we need one more white weenie deck, and then we'll have.
Is there any other way to get white without blue? I guess not really. It'd have to be either white green or white 8 bears is really the only effective approach there.
Yeah, that's all I can think of. I guess you could have Leyline of Sanctity in your workshop deck.
Oh, true. Not sure we'll give that credit, but I mean, workshop still is part of the format, right? I mean, I was looking at some results from the physical tournaments. It looked like workshops are still doing pretty well immediately after the banning.
I think part of the reason for that is that in Paper Magic, it's hard for a lot of people to switch decks because
Sure.
it's basically trading in your car, and so it's hard to adapt to a workshop deck getting not as good. So even if workshop's not good, you're still going to have a lot of dedicated people playing it, and I think a lot of these workshop players are good enough with the deck that even if the deck's not well positioned, they can still do well with it.
Sure. And you see that, I think, on all the kind of the Eternal formats. You get that in Legacy a lot as well, where people just end up playing the same deck kind of for an extended period of time, even though it moves in and out of favorability. I'm hoping to see some innovations in the Workshop shell now that it's not obvious. Just play all the aggro creatures, and maybe you can come at it from another angle. Who knows? But I think there's definitely still room there for some new deck design.
No, I think there is. I mean, Brian Schlossberg got 9th place with Thought Not Seers.
Sure.
I think that right now, like I still had a main deck Ancient Grudge in my Monastery Mentor, Sylvan Mentor list. If people start to cut those and people start to divest themselves of Workshop hate, then you'll see Workshop being able to really become powerful again.
Absolutely, yeah. It starts taking up the same kind of position as you see Dredge. When Dredge hate tends to wane, it definitely emerges and catches people unprepared.
Right.
And I do personally, from a kind of a metagame perspective, I like having the hyperlinears in more of that kind of position where you don't have to. If it's 30% of the field, you have to dedicate the 10 sideboard slots to it, and it just really constrains your ability to tweak your deck to your sideboard. So we'll see, I think, how that plays out over time.
We will. I mean, my sideboard was over half Dredge hate. I just had the full four Tormod Crypts and 4 Containment Priests. And
that is a lot of that's a lot of hate. But I guess why lose to it when it's kind of the default go-to foil deck at the moment.
I think that it naturally has a strong game against mentor decks. So sure. I think that I think in some ways you could build a mentor deck designed to beat other mentor decks, but in some ways that's really irresponsible because then you'll lose to all the people that are sort of next leveling and playing a deck that beats mentor decks, not just tuning their mentor deck to beat mentor decks. And one of the top ways to beat a mentor deck is to catch that mentor deck unprepared with a bunch of zombies.
Yep, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we're ready now to jump down to the match. So we're gonna cut over and watch the final match of the first round here at the VSL Play-In Tournament. All right, welcome back. This is the final play-in match here for the first round. Excuse me, the first round of the VSL play-in tournament. We have up ahead of us now. We have Brian Kelly, who is the reigning Vintage World Champion, playing against Caleb Durward, a renowned kind of brewer and deck builder. It looks like we have 2 more blue decks, so we're not the white decks will not pull ahead, at least in this round. Although there's still 4 more decks that are unknown for the people who are placing in. But we're seeing Caleb off to a blazing start here on the play.
He has a young Pyromancer. That's quite possibly the best 1 red and 1 other 2/1 red creature ever printed. But the champ has the best 1 colored and 1 colorless 2/1 black creature ever printed. In fact, he's competing in this very play-in tournament, Bob Marr himself.
That is true, yeah. So we're seeing 2 of the premier 2-drops really of all time. Colors, and we see the 3rd one sitting in Caleb's hand here in Snapcaster Age. So yep. We're getting a real all-star list here of 2-drops. What do you think about kind of the matchup here? Pyromancer, an early Pyromancer against these other mentor lists.
Well, I don't like Pyromancer as a card in this format. He grows laterally, and Mentor grows in all directions. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, Pyromancer is often found in hyper-aggressive decks that want to make the opponent lose life. Dark Confidant also wants to make Brian Kelly lose life, so in that sense, they're sort of going to work together, and that's called synergy. One interesting thing is, I'm not sure what Caleb's deck is doing. What card did he just draw?
That, I believe, is a scab. What is that thing called? It's a Scab Clan Berserker. What the heck?
Scab Clan Berserker. What's the Scab Clan Berserker?
I vaguely remember it from Limited. I think it's from Gate Crash, I want to say. It's a rare from Gate Crash that I know it's a haste creature. What? With Renowned. Interesting. I'm actually going to pull this up here.
All right. Please tell us what this card does. But we know what Brian Kelly's card does. It's Mentor, and I don't see Caleb's hand being able to handle this whatsoever.
So Scab Clan Berserker, it's a 2/2 haste with Renowned 1 for 3 mana. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, if it is Renowned, deal 2 damage to them. So it turns into a Pyrostatic Pillar once it's hit the opponent once.
So it just hits the opponent, not the opponent's creatures?
Correct, yeah. So it's just Pyrostatic Pillar.
Okay.
And it has to connect for that to happen, and it costs double red here, which is obviously going to be challenging, given that Caleb doesn't have any red mana that can cast it. He had to name Human on his Cavern of Souls, and the Berserker is it's a human. It's okay, so he has 1 red for it now.
So I love the fact that Brian's attacking here, just offering this trade, because he's so far ahead that I think the only way he's going to lose is if he flips over something.
I agree. I definitely like this attack here. Once you have Mentor in play, everything else kind of becomes superfluous. Right. He already has the probe as well to trigger it and to draw and to get more action. So this seems like a really good attack from him.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, unless Caleb draws something spectacular. Hey, look, he drew something spectacular.
That is pretty good. So we saw Brian Kelly decide not to play the probe to keep a second blue card in hand.
And it's awfully clever now, isn't it? Because
definitely looking smart.
Caleb's going to try to draw 3 cards, and Brian Kelly is just going to draw a Mentor token.
Because he could play out interesting. So if Brian doesn't draw a spell on his turn, these elemental tokens can trade off with the monks, so they probably won't be able to attack. And Caleb does have Snapcaster Mage for this Ancestral next turn. So some pressure here actually on Brian to find something like a Preordain or a Ponder, even a Mox, something to trigger his prowess so he can attack this turn.
That's true. That Ancestral is really, really good for Caleb. I'm sure Brian would rather have cast his spell than pitch it, but I'm sure he's also glad that he didn't try to cycle it, because if he has a blue card on top, unless it's counter, he'll be able to play it.
Yep. And then,
Repeal. That's an incredible draw.
Yeah, so obviously this is an LSV special. He's a big fan of Repeal and Vintage. Here it's going to be at its best, bouncing one of his own Mox into double trigger prowess and double trigger making tokens.
Brassman and I actually came up with Repeal as a card for Vintage in his basement a very long time ago. And we tried all kinds of shells for it, and it was never really effective. But this was long before they printed Monastery Mentor, of course. Sure.
Monastery Mentor has changed the valuations of a lot of the cantrips and cheaper spells in Vintage by a pretty huge margin. Luis has been playing this card for a long time, as well. It's just a good value card. It just solves a lot of problems. Interesting. Choosing to fire off the. Oh, of course he's gonna misstep it. That makes.
It's interesting
sense.
that Caleb is so afraid of what Brian's deck is going to do that he's countering a repeal rather than re-ancestraling next turn.
Which makes sense. I mean, he's under so much pressure from these tokens, and that repeal represents at least one more trigger of Mentor just from the Mox, and it could easily just draw into any other cheap card. So I think he can't let it resolve there.
Oh, I agree. I think this makes perfect sense as a play from Caleb. I think this speaks to the ridiculous potency of Monastery Mentor as a card, that you'd rather have your opponent not get back his Mox and draw a random card, even if it costs you an Ancestral Recall.
Yeah, that definitely speaks to kind of the relative valuation of cards once Mentor hits play. It is, I mean, it's clearly one of the most preeminent cards in Vintage. It's very format defining at this point. So lots of trading going on here. I like this from Caleb. He needs to try to manage his life total and hope to find some kind of answer for Mentor. Looks like he's blue-red, so theoretically he's going to have some lightning bolts in his deck. Unfortunately, he has no red mana.
Cast them though, right?
Yeah, other than that Cavernous Soul. So he's going to need a main deck Mindbreak Trap. Interesting.
Wow. That would have been good if you were playing against Reed Duke, as we saw earlier, but
I do think it's a reasonable kind of metagame call here. I think a lot of people speculated that with the restriction of Lodestone Golem, you'll see a massive uptick in Storm, right? Because it still has Dark Petition. Oh, wow. That is
Yawgmoth's Will has arrived.
Yeah, this one is done. I guess the Mindbreak Trap will take out something eventually, but the damage will be done by then. Three spells have been played.
It's over.
Yeah, this game is dunsies.
They even came up in just the right order for Brian, the land arriving first, and then Yawgmoth's Will, so Brian gets to stay at 15 instead of 12.
Yep.
So Yawgmoth's Will is a card that we haven't seen a lot in control decks lately, but a long time ago, Yawgmoth's Will was a central card people called for its banning, not just restriction, but banning. You don't hear about that sort of thing anymore, but back several years ago, Yawgmoth's Will was the cool kid, and now Yawgmoth is trying to make a go of it again. I guess trying to get the old band back together with his pal Brian Kelly.
I mean, it's certainly still one of the defining cards in Vintage. I think it does speak to the kind of the way the format is broadened, where now it's just one of many win conditions in all of these decks, whereas 8 years ago, 7 years ago, it would be the go-to win condition for a lot of these strategies. But as Magic continues to print new cards, you're going to see more and more powerful effects emerge, and you're going to have the weaker end of things get pushed to the margins.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yawgmoth's Will turns your graveyard into your hand, essentially. So Brian has no cards in hand, but he actually has a full hand from Yawgmoth's Will.
Yeah, we're going to see him. I mean, the repeal was so good the first time that it had to get Snapcaster misstepped. We're going to see it come back here again to the same effect. We're going to see at least 4 triggers of Mentor this turn. And I can't imagine with just blue mana that there's anything Caleb's going to be able to find to claw back into this one.
I don't even know what... If you were Caleb and you could put any card on top of your library, provided you get another turn, what would it be? Like Sway of the Stars, but that costs more than 2 blue.
I don't think with this mana available, there's anything he can... I mean, obviously, there's going to be something. I mean, you have to start with something that you draw multiple cards, right? So you'd find...
Can't be Gush. Ancestral's already gone. Couldn't cast Balance.
Yeah, I think the way he wins this game is he finds, like, is there something from, like, Portal 3 Kingdoms for blue and 1 that lets you, like, draw 2 and discard 1?
It's look at the top. It's strategic planning. Look at the top 3, take 1 and put the other 2 in the graveyard.
That's not doing it. Yeah, so he has to find some way to... he can cast Divination. Divination into Lotus Balance.
Okay, there we go. Easy peasy.
We found.
Lotus Divination Balance. Okay, I assume he's probably running both of those cards.
Yeah, if he had the ability to stack his library with any cards in Magic, he could get back to equality. Wouldn't even be winning.
No, but it would be better than losing. Okay,
and now we're the sideboard here. So look at Caleb's deck. Looks like a pretty standard, mostly standard blue-red Pyromancer deck.
Does he have
Two
Gushes?
copies of. He does have 3 copies of Gush, 2 copies of Delver, and 2 copies of Scab Clan Berserker. So I imagine the Berserkers are there for the Storm matchup, much like that main deck Mindbreak Trap. So those are going to the sideboard here. Very bad against Mentor when it can just spam a bunch of tokens.
So the Berserker has haste, so it gets through, and then it stops the opponent. So if Brian were to cast a spell, he would take 2.
Yep.
But it has to get through first.
Exactly. So I think that's probably not where he wants to be positioned in this matchup. It's interesting. So I think the blue-red versions of this, foregoing the white for Monastery Mentor, I think it's an interesting choice in the current metagame. I liked it. At least I thought it was interesting when you had shop stacks that could punish you for being 3 colors. But I think now that we've moved away from that, I think there's not a lot of punishment for adding that white for the much better finisher. But Caleb here, going for kind of a throwback shell and then adding that kind of the spicy Berserker for the Storm matchup.
I agree with you. I think that Delver of Secrets was a really strong card when Mishra's Workshop was everywhere, because you get that down, and if you never cast another spell for the rest of the game, you'll often beat Workshop decks all by
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Season 1 or Season 2 of VSL, I played Delver, and I only had Delvers on my list for Workshops. I boarded them out against every other matchup.
Right.
And it's just so important to have a cheap creature threat against them.
Absolutely. And 3 is the magic number of power, back when they used to have Lodestone Golems.
Exactly. Here on the Brian Kelly side, it's interesting. We can see something you see sometimes in Vintage, which is you kind of just throw a Tendrils of Agony into your kind of blue spells deck to give you this oops, I win late game option around Yawgmoth's Will or something to DT for. Haven't seen that as much recently, but this is something. It was a very frequent component of Vintage deck lists, in years past.
Yeah, I really like Brian's deck. He has some life loss with Dark Confidant, but he can recoup it with Tendrils. He also boarded out a Force of Will, which I think is worth noting, since it's not unlike in Legacy when you're playing against these smaller decks like Delver. You don't necessarily want all of your forces.
Oh, absolutely. I think in Legacy it's even more pronounced because people aren't doing broken things like casting Ancestral Recall, but I do like shaving it in these kind of more fair, grindy value matchups. Where you just don't want to 2-1 yourself. You just want to trade resources evenly on the early turns. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Brian also cut his copy of Jace the Mind Sculptor, which I thought was interesting. Maybe he's afraid of having to be pressured by Delvers or by Pyromancer tokens, and maybe just a little too slow.
I think so. So now Caleb has Sudden Shock online, which is always a powerful card.
It's a great answer to Monastery Mentor here, but the rest of his hand is pretty mediocre.
Yeah, it is.
I would have considered mulliganing this hand, but he had the Probe, I guess, which if you assume it's going to draw a card a decent percentage of the time.
He has Gush, so he has a plan, and he can deal with an early. He can deal with an early Mentor if Brian had it. A lot of the time, if your opponent just has land Mox Mentor, the game's completely over.
Sure. I definitely don't hate the keep. I think it's on the bottom end of the keeping range, but I think it's certainly.
But it got better. It got better. So Caleb drew Ancestral there, and you'll note that Brian left open Flusterstorm rather than using Preordain.
He's an interesting decision there. I think I like it. Don't put the shields down, especially if you've already burned one misstep.
I think that makes sense. So now Caleb has to decide if he wants to Ancestral now or not. Of course, he does it now. He's crashing headfirst into Brian's Flusterstorm.
Yeah, maybe Caleb should have done it on upkeep there, potentially. I mean, that's a...
So Brian took a land off his Preordain. I kind of wonder if that's a misclick.
Did he topped it, or did he go bottom?
Oh, I don't know.
I assume you bottom there. I can't imagine you want
to
top a land in this spot.
Okay, that makes sense. So Caleb could be waiting to cast the Ancestral until he has some backup for it.
Well, this is an aggressive Gush.
It is an aggressive Gush. Oh, he found Young Pyromancer, though.
Oh, yeah, he got rewarded. I guess in a deck like this where you operate so low to the ground, you don't really need to have 3 mana in play. You can afford to cash that Gush and try to find some action.
So that's a reasonable advantage that this has over, say, Mentor.
Yeah, because I know in the mentor mirrors, I like just building up lots of mana. Even though you do play with cards like Gush and you're still a very cheap deck, um, a lot of the blue mirrors just come down to me resolve one extra spell. But here, Caleb's hand, the texture of it isn't reactive at all. So he's not anticipating these long, drawn out counterfights or trying to set up Flusterstorm plus something. So I think it makes sense to try to just pull ahead here and barrack Brian under an early tempo advantage.
Look at how patient Caleb's being with that Ancestral.
He may get forced into. Wow! He's going to pull the trigger on Force of Will here.
Really? Wow.
He must feel like he is really disadvantaged, and his hand is.
I think Caleb hates Ancestral, right? He chose not to flash it back last game. He's just pitching it. Caleb hates Ancestral. Maybe he just read the force opponent to draw 3 cards part, running it to try to deck the opponent, but if you can find a way to pitch it, then good.
Well, as we learned earlier, that is the win condition in modern versions of Dragon. So
exactly.
No, I do think here. I mean, Caleb might feel like he just needs to try to put pressure on with that Pyromancer, and by pitching the Ancestral, he gets to play around cards like Mental Misstep, which obviously would interact with the Ancestral, but not with the counterspell. But I don't know. I feel like his hand's so clunky that I think he would want to try to just steal some cards with that Ancestral at some point in this game.
I'm usually a pretty conservative player. I'm not all that greedy, but I would have gone for the Ancestral there. I would rather have the Ancestral than the Young Pyromancer. Even in a deck that's creature-based like Caleb's, part of the reason that you play it is you don't defend your creatures. You draw cards, and the creatures sort of channel your draw into a win.
I do think it's possible that because he had the Sudden Shock in his hand, he wasn't afraid of getting his Pyromancer trumped by a Mentor, and so therefore he put more weight on keeping it in play. Whereas I think if he didn't have Sudden Shock, fighting over that Swords of Plowshares is so dangerous when Kelly could just drop Mentor and just be so far ahead.
I can see that. I don't know. I always play Delver decks like I'm just trying to outdraw the opponent. And
I agree with you. And I know for people that have watched a lot of VSL over the seasons, if you've seen the way in which Steve Menendian plays these Delver decks, he takes that to the utmost extreme. He never exposes any of his. He throws his creatures away, boards down to 1 or 2 of them oftentimes, and plays it in such a controlling fashion. But clearly Caleb's looking to be a little more aggressive here and try to be more proactive.
Yeah, we've seen Steve just discard Delver because he had too many cards in hand rather than play the Delver.
I do remember that. Controversial let's play decision at that point. There was in a match against LSV, if I remember correctly. But it was really...
I think it was. That was a very good match that LSV did end up winning.
So here we see Kelly draws Containment Priest. So this is basically Ambush Viper in this matchup, but being able to ambush a Pyromancer is such great value that I like bringing this in here.
Wow, so that was really good. That Brainstorm from Caleb, that's exactly what he needed. So next turn he might actually get to attack with his Berserker.
It will run promptly into the ambushing, but he will have at least one
Sudden Shock to get it through.
Yeah. So presumably here he puts
Brian's
back...
hand. He knows Brian's hand, so he knows that unless Brian draws something, he can play her or him or whatever that card is, and then just crash through with it. Now Brian has his very own Pyrostatic Pillar.
And as someone in the chat pointed out, it is Pyrostatic Pillar without the converted mana cost requirement, because Pillar is only on 3 or less. Okay. It is any spell, so it's a better form. You have to work a little bit harder for it, but it is a better version of Pillar once it's in play. So here I think if I'm Caleb, I'm putting back Scalding Tarn and putting back maybe putting back Berserker actually, so that Brian won't see it coming if he draws his own probe, and then just going Volcanic Island, Pyromancer, go. Because I don't believe he's played a land yet.
Right. Oh. So next turn he can. Now he can play this guy, and next turn he can play the Berserker. Oh, but without the land, he can't Sudden Shock to get it through.
Oh, true. So maybe he's actually planning to just attacking with Pyromancer and just double Sudden Shocking and holding the Berserker for the following turn.
I guess that makes sense, since double Sudden Shock will still take care of Brian Kelly's board. Brian drew a land, and so Caleb knows everything in Brian Kelly's hand now.
And here we see the awkwardness of having this Tendrils thrown into these lists. Sometimes you just draw it out. especially post board when your deck becomes so interactive. You bring in all these cards like Flusterstorm, other counter magic. It can be hard to get a lot of cantrips and build up a big hand. And even for a card like Yawgmoth's Will, that's going to be so hotly contested, it can be hard to set up a lethal one of those as well. Exactly. When you don't have anything like Ritual to set it up.
The problem with Tendrils is if you put it in your deck, sometimes you draw it. So now we're going to see Ambush Viper mode from Brian Kelly, and then that's going to get shocked. So we're basically watching a draft here.
I do like the way Caleb sequences. So he has the fetch land in play. So now if he draws, if for instance Brian were to play a Mentor, he can go ahead and shuffle away that Berserker. He's not locked into drawing it here. And then if Brian doesn't do anything, he can choose to draw it and play it next turn.
And I think this is the power of Gitaxian Probe.
Absolutely. Playing really well here with perfect information.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any way Caleb could have anticipated the sequence, but then when he saw Brian's hand, he knew it was coming.
The one upside of the cards like Tendrils in this matchup is oftentimes, and that's a great draw, I imagine, for Brian here.
Wow.
He has plenty of mana, so he can tutor for whatever you might want here. But I would just finish that thought. Sorry, go ahead.
Does Brian have anything that would make Yawgmoth's Will happen?
I don't think so. Like I was mentioning before, like his graveyard is really just a bunch of interactive cards. I think he has a preordained, but then he has like a Flusterstorm, a Jace, Swords to Plowshares, and a Mental Misstep. So I don't think he can do a lot with Yawgwill here. Tendrils thing is really in here for the games in which the Delver deck does a lot of damage to itself. Because when the Delver deck's playing 4 Probes and 4 Missteps and a bunch of fetch lands, it often does 10 damage to itself, and you can kill them with the mini Tendrils. But in this game, Caleb's draw has been very kind of preserves his own life total really nicely. He hasn't drawn those cards, so Tendrils is looking especially bad here.
It is. So, do you get Ancestral or Mentor here? So, Caleb has no cards in his hand. So, those seem like the best plays to me, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I would almost certainly get Mentor here. You can get Mentor, play Mox, make a token.
Right.
Your tokens, then Caleb can't even attack, and then next turn you can just play Tendrils if you have to for 2 even, just making another token and triggering Prowess.
It sure would be really greedy if Brian took Ancestral.
I think that would be a really aggressive, kind of greedy line, especially since Caleb's used 3 copies of Sudden Shock. How many answers can he have left for a Mentor here? Although one thing that Brian does know is that Caleb chose to keep whatever cards on top of his turn. Interesting. For the Swords to Plowshares?
Or is he just rebuying Demonic
Tutor and setting up a suspended Mentor? That I don't know. That seems
Or he could be setting up a Tendrils or a Yawgmoth's Will for next turn.
But would that one even be enough? I mean, he's not going to have anything additional in his graveyard that's really interactive. He still have 2 more mana. He can Tendrils for like 6 or 8, but without DT,
you can Demonic Tutor. No, you can't Demonic Tutor because that's gone.
It's going away. Yeah.
Right. You can Demonic Tutor. No, you can't Demonic Tutor because that's gone.
It's going away. Yeah.
Right.
I like Mentor here.
It probably is Mentor.
The one thing here, though, so he knew that Caleb knows his top card and chose to keep it, right? Because Caleb put 2 back, played an untapped land, and then the next turn played a fetch land, meaning that he sequenced it so he didn't shuffle away this top card, because he could have just put back the Volcanic and the card and shuffled immediately. So he likes his top card, or his top card is something that might be situationally powerful. So that might be a factor in Brian's mind that maybe there's like a lightning bolt sitting on top of the library, and he's concerned about that.
That makes sense. Brian has also cleverly played around Berserker.
He has. Having a creature in play here is... I expect Caleb actually to just go ahead and... Actually, so Brian's at 11, so if he just gets Berserker, plays it, he needs to hit Brian for 5, put him down to 6.
Mm-hmm.
He knows there's a Tendrils in hand, though, so he has to be scared about getting Tendrils out here, or just having Brian gain a lot of life back. So my guess is he shuffles and tries to find something more impactful than that Berserker here. Well, it's very close. I wouldn't fault him for keeping Berserker.
Brian played well around the unknown thing that Caleb had.
Yeah, so
this is actually a really exciting game.
Oof, not the draw step he was looking for. So he
That
probably
was
just sends
even
in the
worse than a
tokens.
Berserker. So I guess, yeah, assuming that Caleb doesn't have anything, Brian's taking the clock from 3 a turn to 5 a turn.
Still, I wonder. I mean, yeah, he must have been worried about that top card because Caleb went to such lengths to keep it. He kept a 5th mana source just to have the card preserved.
Hmm.
So he must have thought it was like really, really good.
Right. So maybe Brian did anticipate the Berserker.
I imagine he thought it was something much better than Berserker, right? I mean, because had he seen? Well, did he know there's a Berserker in play? Did he probe at some point? He didn't this game. So yeah, he didn't.
Wow, gosh.
That
That's a good.
is
That's
best
a really good
possibles.
one, actually.
Yeah, I think that's actual best possible.
So, unlike Snapcaster Mage, Yawgmoth's Will does let you rebuy Gush for its alternate cost. So that means that Brian's going to get to Gush, Yawgmoth's Will re-Gush, which 3. Yeah, he's actually going to be able to cast a whole bunch of spells here. I mean, he's going to start off with a Gush, but depending on where this goes,
much for this to be lethal.
He could tendrils. Oh,
wow.
That's. I think he's got him. I think Brian Kelly has just accidentally won the game.
Yeah, I guess if you know you're going to draw Gush, getting Yawgmoth's Will there that turn pays off much more than the Mentor line.
Lotus Petal with a Yawgmoth's Will is like 2/3 of a Black Lotus, and it's 2 Storm. So Storm is Gush, Artifact Spell, Yawgmoth's Will.
It's lethal.
Regush, Petal.
Source to Plowshares. Misstep something if he wants to. He has lethal here now.
Yeah, wow. All right. Nice.
Well, that came out of nowhere.
That was incredible. Brian Kelly just went from being in a rough spot to this, and this is why Yawgmoth's Will is a card. Because while it often doesn't do anything on its own when the stars align, or when you built your deck to make the stars align, this happens.
Yeah, this was a really sudden turn of events here. And so as you can see, just to finish it off, Brian Storm already at 5. He'll cast Preordain to get to 6. He'll Gush to get to 7, and then cast Tendrils for 16. Interesting. Source of Plowshares gained Caleb 2 life, so it actually doesn't really increase his Storm count at all.
I guess that's true.
He should have misstepped the swords.
He should have misstepped it. So Brian hasn't ever played Magic the Gathering online before. I don't think he knows how to hold priority.
It is a tricky little. It's a hidden Easter egg. Oh, okay. Well, that made it easier.
In case Brian needed to have more free spells. Wow.
And there we go.
Wow, that was incredible.
That was a very sudden into the game. I thought Caleb was actually looking pretty good there.
Yeah.
When Brian chose to go get the Yawgwill and it ended up not being enough there. Pretty crazy end of the game.
It was an awesome match, and the champ has emerged victorious with a pretty interesting brew. This is not an established vintage archetype.
So, no, not at all. It's not established at all. It was really. I've toyed around some Esper mentor lists. I think it is an interesting space. Though I've really explored it with Dark Confidant. I like his deck there a lot. I think it lines up really interestingly against the traditional Jeskai versions of Mentor. And I'm excited to kind of see how he progresses. So with that victory, he now advances into the winner's bracket. So for everyone watching at home, the way that the playing tournament here is structured is this tournament is a 12-person double elimination tournament where the 4 people who faced relegation from last season's of VSL all got a first-round bye. So that would be Bob Maher, Stephen Menendian, Kai, and myself. And then the 8 new contenders all battled it out in this round. And we saw David Williams, Andy Parasco, and now Brian Kelly and Paul Rizzo all advance. The 4 losers of those matches, Shuhei, Reed Duke, Caleb Durward, and Nick Koss go down to the losers bracket where they'll meet the losers of the next 4 matches. 2 of those are happening tonight, so we have 2 more matches going on. I'm not sure. The first one I think is going to be Kai against Brian, which we just saw. Brian winning there. and then the next match will be Paul Riesel against myself, battling out to round out the evening. And then next week, we'll get to see the final two hidden decks. Bob Maher and Steve Menendian will make their appearance for the first time in the play-in tournament, and we'll see how that goes with them. Oh, I'm now being told by the voice in my ear, it's actually Bob tonight, not Kai. Kai was hanging out in our chat. I guess he was just here watching. So we're going to see Bob against Dave Williams next,
right.
and then cutting over to Paul Riesel against me to round out the evening.
So you're going to play later tonight? All right.
Yep, 2 more matches to go. So we're going to take a quick break, cut to some ads, and we'll be back for Bob Maher against Dave Williams next.
Good luck, Tom.